Welcome to Shortened Movies. Today I'm going to show a 2017 post-apocalyptic horror drama film called Cargo. Watch out, spoilers ahead. In a post-apocalyptic world, a man named Andy, his wife Kay, and their daughter Rosie are living on a boathouse along the river, barely surviving on scavenged food and supplies as their supplies run out. Kay suggests that they go on land to resupply at a nearby rural town, but Andy insists that they just keep following the river. They soon stumble upon a washed-up yacht and Andy goes alone to resupply their food. Once he comes back, he volunteers to watch over their daughter as Kay watches over the boathouse. She spots the yacht and heads over by herself to get more supplies. When Andy wakes up, he finds Kay in the bathroom with a bleeding leg. They now have 48 hours before she becomes fully infected, and he decides to take the risk and travel on land to look for a hospital to help stop Kay's bleeding. They take what they can and begin to set out on foot as Andy and his family travel with a stolen car. They come across Thumi's infected father in the middle of the road. Shocked at his grotesque appearance, and he swerves to the right and drives right through a large tree and crashes, and he wakes up to find his wife impaled by a branch. She had written the words "Save her" on their car before finally succumbing to the infection. Now fully infected, Kay lashes out at her husband as he tries to save their only daughter. She bites into his arm, transferring the deadly infection into his bloodstream, and he manages to get out of the car with Rosie. He breaks his wife's neck to stop her suffering and slumps down on the side of their car, screaming in frustration. He wears the countdown watch on his wrist. He's only got 48 hours to lead her daughter to safety before he succumbs to death. Determined for her daughter to survive, and he walks to an abandoned facility and meets Etta, the only living being still inhabiting the place. She fixes up Andy's bleeding arm and offers them food and shelter for the night. Etta reveals that she used to be a school teacher and that all of her students have gone back to living in the old ways. Meanwhile, Femi hides from her mother and her tribe, who have gone back to living in the old ways. The next morning they soon come across a military base overrun by the infected as they search for a means of escape. Andy meets a loud-talking gunman named Vic, who's stuck in a hole under several gas tanks. He starts Vic's truck and helps him escape the hole by pulling out the gas tanks attached to the truck. Returning the favor, Vic lets them hop into his truck and drives them to his safe house. There Andy and Rosie meet a woman named Lorraine, who he assumes to be Vic's wife. Vic insists that Andy joins him at the hunting grounds, hesitant to decline the gunman who saved their lives, and he agrees and leaves his daughter in the care of Lorraine. Vic then takes Andy into an open field where a horde of the infected was attacking a metal cage. Vic teaches him to shoot the horde until not a single one is standing. As they approach the dead horde, Andy looks completely terrified to realize that there is a young girl, Fumi, inside the cage. Later that night, Andy tucks in her daughter and feels the heavy sense of desperation creeping onto him. The symptoms of the infection have begun, and he excuses himself out of the room. In a dark corner of the safe house, he kneels and contemplates killing himself. Maybe it would be better if he killed himself now. After all, Rosie is safe with this couple looking after her. Before he strikes himself dead, Andy is interrupted by Lorraine emerging from the shadows carrying his daughter, and he tells her that Rosie will be better off with them, but Lorraine tells him that they should escape. She then reveals that Vic is a horrible monster, and that he has trapped her in this place and made her his wife against her will just after killing her husband. Their conversation is cut short by an angered Vic, who accuses Andy of stealing his wife. He strikes Andy in the head before he could answer, and then he passes out. Once Andy wakes up, he finds himself inside the cage with Fumi. Desperate to escape, Andy starts banging on the walls of the cage trying to find a way out. The loud sound only draws the infected mirror. Andy then spots a long rope tied to the door of the cage. He ties a piece of meat into it and throws it far away to attract the horde. The horde takes the bait, and as more infected pulled on the rope, the cage door begins to budge open. A frantic Andy quickly slips through the gap on the cage door and convinces Fumi to follow him. A loud thud prompts the cage door to close back down, chopping the chains that bound their hands. Through the darkness, a terrified Andy runs with Fumi by his side towards the safe house. Once they got back to the place, Andy wakes up sleeping Lorraine and takes Rosie with him. He steals Vic's keys, and just as they were about to make a run for it, the floodlights of the house open and merges a raging Vic. The group makes a run for it as the crazy gunman loads up his rifle. He takes aim at Andy and pulls the trigger, but Lorraine jumps up in front of them, taking the bullet to the chest and allowing them to escape. As morning breaks, Andy's symptoms have gone worse. The feeling of dread continues to build up as he knows that he hasn't got a lot of time before he's gone. Not wanting to waste more time, Andy and Fumi begin to hike. Andy tells her of his plan to leave Rosie with a family that he saw living by the river. They get a hold of Andy's old boat and sees their previous boathouse still parked near the trees. After a few more minutes on the boat, they leave on foot until they reach the trailer. In a car, Andy leaves Fumi in the trailer as he and her daughter go looking for the family. He soon finds them within the property, with the father digging a large hole in the ground. Feeling confused for a second, Andy soon realizes that the father is infected as he spots the countdown watch on his wrist. The father approaches Andy and begs him to take his 2 children, but he couldn't even if he wanted to. He was infected himself. The father reveals a gun, telling him that he has 6 bullets left and if Andy wanted to kill himself he could. Andy refuses his offer, and as he walks away, 4 loud gunshots echo through the forest. The family's bodies drop dead as Andy bears the weight of their death on him. He takes the gun from the father and for a second contemplates killing his daughter. At this point he is feeling desperate and sees no other way to save Rosie. Fumi interrupts his thoughts and tells her about her people. If they can find them in time, Rosie will be safe. They continue their journey once more, following the black smoke that filled the sky as they enter through a railway tunnel. They encounter several infected in hibernation. At the end of the tunnel they meet a distraught Vic. The trio hides from them, with Fumi and Rosie taking refuge in the truck as Andy hides within the hibernating horde. Vic searches for him as he frantically tries to load the gun as Vic takes out the infected one by one. He finally reaches Andy and lunges at him. A battle ensues, prompting Andy to drop the gun. Vic lands a series of punches on him and renders him unconscious for a few seconds. Vic hops back to the car and slams Fumi into the tracks. He then carries Rosie as he pauses before thinking about killing her. Andy regains consciousness and approaches Vic, who's holding his daughter hostage. Vic tells her it's only right to kill his daughter since Andy has taken someone important from him too. Andy tells him that Lorraine never belonged to him, as Vic sobs, and he gently prompts him to give his daughter back. Vic knows there's no going back and there's nothing he can do. He finally hands Rosie over to her father. Andy quickly gets through him, and they exit the railway tunnel as fast as they can before Vic changes his mind. They continue their trek with Andy in pain as he continues to bleed from his injuries. Several miles down the road they are forced to stop as Andy's symptoms worsen. He drops to the ground and starts digging. His nose picks up the scent of rotting meat, and Andy knows he hasn't got much time until he couldn't resist the urge anymore. He picks up the meat from the carcass and ties it to the end of a stick. He faces Fumi and makes her promise to take care of Rosie no matter what, to which the little girl agrees. Andy then kisses her daughter goodbye because he knows the time has finally run out. With Fumi and Rosie on his back, and he follows the scent of the rotting meat hanging from the stick, he has now become fully infected. With yellowish sap pouring out from his eyelids and mouth, he walks brainlessly towards the plains as Fumi sets the path with her stick. As they grow closer to the source of the smoke, Fumi's mother and her tribe grow suspicious of the emerging figure from the shadows. Figuring it's just another infected, they start to leave until a sharp whistle comes from the smoke. The mother orders them to wade in. From the smoke appears her daughter on the back of an infected being. The tribe approaches the children and quickly rescues them from the infected. Fumi is reunited with her mother and says that she's ready to go home. She has promised her friend, the infected being, that she would take good care of his daughter. The mother understands and takes Rosie into her arms. As the elder tribesman aims a spear to Andy's heart, Fumi stops him. She takes out a bottle of perfume that Andy's wife used to wear and sprays it onto Andy's face, giving him one last bittersweet memory before he passes. Fumi then looks over to the tribesman and nods her head, holding her friend's hand. The spear pierces through Andy's heart, killing him instantly as he slumps back to the ground. Fumi says her final goodbyes to her friend as she and Rosie join the tribe. They soon arrive at the tribe's refuge, hidden deep within a mountain range, where they are welcomed by the people. The mother lifts Rosie and sees a message written on her tummy saying thank you. Subscribe the channel for more similar videos. Turn on the notifications. Leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.